This is the first of a new PhocusWire and Phocuswright co-branded series. We've called it, they've given it the rather lofty title of the New Reality With. And part of that is we are getting together industry leaders, thought leaders, people that have got strong things to say and have got a lot of experience in the industry to just give us a brief perspective of how they're doing at the moment, but really to kind of give us some idea of ways some of the mechanics around the industry are likely to change or may not change even, which is, you know, the one thing that we've all learned very quickly is that everybody has a prediction and a forecast on what's going to emerge. So we're after those kind of predictions that that may stand the test of time as we go through what has essentially been, to use the word that we sadly have used way too much in the media, unprecedented times, to just kind of get a sense from other people rather than just through our normal reporting, but in these face-to-face fireside chats. We did discuss what would these be, unless they're Zoom side chats, because we haven't got a fireside with us. So these are Zoom side chats. And our first guest, and thank you very much, is Clayton Reid. So you're the CEO of MMGY Global. You're based in Kansas City, and you're there at the rather empty offices of MMGY Global in KC. So thank you very much, Clayton, for joining us on New Reality With.
Yeah, hi Kevin, how are you, man?
Okay, I'm good. I'm stuck at home. My kids are in the room behind me, hopefully doing some schoolwork. So, yeah. So I've kind of set the scene, and we'll just dive in if that's okay. So again, Clayton, thanks ever so much for joining us. I mean, let's start off with really a general feedback and a discussion, if we can, on what is the state of play in travel marketing. Now, we know things started being we got a sense here in the West, if we can group my continent and your continent together as the West, as to what was potentially coming down the track in mid to late January. But then everything, you know, seemingly went off a cliff in late February and early March. What did you see from the clients that you have and the people that you talk to with as to what was going to happen with their marketing? Did it just get cut straight away, or was there a scaling back? Or maybe it depends on the brand, but I'm just interested in your kind of perspective first as to what happened in that early phase.
Yeah, interesting. You know, we have clients around the world, so we have a number of clients in Asia, and we saw that sort of unfold across the globe as the virus did. Early on, we saw clients in the Asian market starting to really slow down their spending as the virus became more of a story. And it sort of swept through Europe, where our European clients began to cut back, and then finally North America and South America, mostly North America. We haven't seen a ton of reduction in our South American clients yet, but we do expect to now as it continues to move along. But, you know, it was pretty sudden. I mean, I think people, once they understood the gravity of what was going on, and as soon as travel controls went into place, whether they be border controls or shutting down of flight controls or whatever the government advisories were, we saw a pretty immediate cessation of travel. I mean, you can look at markets like Macau, Singapore, Hong Kong early on, certainly intra-China, Australia, and New Zealand, which had very strict restrictions pretty early on in terms of travel. And then as it swept through Europe and the United States, I would say well over 70% of our global clients, and that's, you know, $60 million of net revenue for us, hundreds of millions of dollars of spend. I would say 70% of that was pushed back in 2020 or beyond in terms of how the dollars were being spent. Of course, there was a massive pivot to where those dollars were going to be spent.
Yeah.
You know, broad branding, general informational public relations, more retail advertising shifted entirely to social crisis communication, some paid search. So of the spending that remained, it was really in those categories. And then broadly, the spending was pushed back pretty dramatically, and not so slowly.
Yeah, I mean, we ran an article a week or so ago, which was discussing, if we can kind of bring it up to the here and now, really. I mean, there's very little marketing activity going on. And I mean, interestingly, there have been some very, it's not, I suppose it is marketing in a way, but, you know, inspirational videos, come and see us soon, you know, taking that negative and put it into a positive to kind of keep people's minds front and center with a destination. Many destinations have done this. But one of these, this article that we ran a week or so ago was saying maybe is now the time, now that so many countries have either reached or on the way down from their peak, to start building up some activity. And that's mainly, I guess, around PPC and things like that. Is that something that you would also advise, or are you starting to see? And how do brands just really start to think about resuming any activity of any kind?
Yeah. So first, I don't think any good brands stopped communicating. I mean, I think the smart marketers stayed engaged with their best customers, and maybe through more empathy messages or healing messages, certainly. And even in paid search, we have a pretty large paid search practice, and we've been looking at search analytics. And while booking and volume on paid search was down significantly, there was still a fair amount of activity that was, that's the thing. And you've written about this as well. Yeah. There are people engaged more than ever in terms of marketing. And there are people engaged more than ever in thinking about travel when they can again do travel. Now, I would say that some of the we're in this together stuff started to become noise at some point, meaning the early people, I'll give you the city of Las Vegas as an example. The city of Las Vegas was out there very early with a hopeful message, which I thought was brilliantly done. But the Me Too of this, as so many brands jumped into the we're in this together thing, started to feel a little bit disingenuous in some ways. And I'm not talking necessarily just about travel. I'll give you an example. Lexus, the automobile brand, started running ads about how they're a people company, not a car company. And I really feel like some of that's tone deaf. And I think that's really important, especially for travel brands, to think about what's the appropriate tone. And so first, to your first question, when do you weigh in? Well, we're looking at traveler sentiment turning more and more positive every day. We're doing a bi-weekly sentiment survey that in the last wave told us traveler sentiment's up 7 points. Intent to travel's up. It's up in certain pockets that we could talk about if you'd like to. But people are definitely turning more to, all right, I am going to travel. At least my intent to travel is much more significant now than it has been. And I think that gives marketers permission to move from empathy and being tone appropriate to the crisis itself to starting to be more about, we are a travel brand and we want you to travel again. Yeah. And the message is travel's a right that we all want to pursue. I think it's tricky and it's nuanced, but I think the time now is for marketers to be more about, instead of the empathy message, it's more about travel will be here again. Start thinking about our brand as part of that.
It's interesting that you said that the empathy, we've seen lots of inspirational videos and come back soon and things like that. And this is why this is why you are missing us, all of this kind of thing. I hadn't reached the same conclusion as you, that perhaps there were too many of those. Perhaps it's because you're in the ad industry and the marketing sector that perhaps you felt that way. But it's interesting that having to switch from that to something else, fairly quickly, that's still 6-7 weeks from one type of campaign to another already, right?
This is part of the point though, Kevin. I think some brands have permission to talk about this and don't. I would say Lexus doesn't. We don't really need Lexus to weigh in early on about how they're a people company in my view. There are brands that have permission. They're either associated with the crisis or they have permission because they're seen as a sense of purpose brand. And I think it's tricky who can do that and who can't. But I would argue the good brands didn't have to turn a switch from we're empathetic to we're part of your travel solution. Yeah. Merge the messages. I'll give you an example. We've launched a campaign called Buy One, Give One. Fairmont Hotels and a number of other hoteliers are part of this. And the idea was buy some travel now, and we're going to do something for you to help your travel experience be better and appropriate. Yeah. And we're also going to give something to frontline workers who are continuing to work through this crisis. I think by connecting what you really are as a brand, I'm a travel provider, I am not pretending to be something else, and at the same time showing empathy and creating some kind of mechanism whereby you're giving back to the industry in a way, gives the traveler permission to feel better about your brand, but also gives you relevance to the crisis as opposed to inventing something of empathy that isn't necessarily relevant or tone appropriate. Yeah. And I think that's the nuance.
Yeah. So so we've gone through empathy to being relevant and things like that. The next stage is really, and I think you kind of referenced it or hinted at it just a short while ago, is this kind of, we're someone you can trust. We were the ones, we're just on another similar type of thing as this with some journalist colleagues. And we were talking about how and maybe this is a question, and do you sense then that people will be turning back to brands that they trusted, that got them through, whether they got them home, whether they gave them a refund on time, and all those kind of things? Or do you think it's going to be back to, dare I say now, kind of the good old days of cheap prices, and those are things that people are going to be drawn to, maybe because they've got their own financial hardships? Or is it a combination of the two?
It's a loaded question. I think first, people will broadly return to the brands they've known and trusted irrespectively. I mean, I think that, you know, whether it's because they're in a loyalty program that they're invested in, or it's because it's just a brand they know well. I'll give you the cruise space as an example. You know, cruisers are incredibly loyal. And if there's any industry that's been disrupted more than cruise, I'd like you to tell me who it is. Yeah. You see rebooking rates for the cruise lines starting to really turn up. And I think it's because cruisers are broadly very loyal. And I think they'll be loyal to the brands that they were loyal to before. But at the same time, I think there need to be inducements coming out of this crisis. Good travel brands will create the right inducement, whether it's fare and rate driven, or whether it's value add driven, or whether it's just sounding the right tone around what the traveler's experiencing from a fear standpoint, and making sure you're empathetic to that, but as part of the travel booking and experience, the travel experience itself. I think those are really important to being relevant as a brand coming out of this. The other thing that's true about this is there's going to be an economic cost. So travelers are going to have, some will have less economic wherewithal. So what does that look like in terms of demand generators going forward? And we could have a whole discussion about where we think demand is going to come back and in what pace. But from a leisure standpoint, I think you've got to understand that people will either move up market because they still can afford to, and because rates in the luxury end of the market are going to come down. So some people will have the ability to trade up, or people who are already in the upper market still can afford to do those things. Or you'll have people who will need to trade down because they've felt some economic hardship. In the United States, unemployment could be as high as 7% by the end of the year, and it's well over 20% right now. In Europe, I think you see some similar labor issues. So the question is, how much rate inducement does there need to be for brands to be relevant for travelers? And how much will low prices and fares drive demand? And I think that's an opportunity that we're going to move away a little bit from pure brand narrative to a price narrative, and especially in the short term, and especially in the leisure market.
Yeah. Let's talk about cruise. I mean, they've arguably got, whether it's rates or brands, or whether it's or branding, or whether they have potentially a bigger marketing message that they need to tackle, which is nothing to do with how cheap that cruise is going to be. And it's nothing to do with the fact that we've got 15 casinos and, you know, the remnants of the Hollies playing every night on the main stage or something like that. They've got a health message to get across as well, right?
I think maybe so. Yeah. I read this morning that NCL, for example, is saying they may not be able to make it to the other side. And they're talking about the coronavirus narrative as part of that reason.
Yeah.
But when I look at our cruise clients, I see, again, as I said earlier, booking pace is picking up substantially. So those who aren't still going to book this year are rebooking in droves for next year.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, I think once COVID-19 sort of makes its way through the broad narrative, societal narrative, I'm not sure cruise gets tagged with that. I think everybody gets tagged with that. You're just as frightened to go into a restaurant as you are to go onto an airplane, as you are to go onto a cruise ship. Yeah. And I don't buy this idea that cruise is suddenly not going to be in favor. If you look at our travel sentiment monitor, even today, there are people who say it's going to be a while before I take a cruise, but they say I'm going to take a cruise again.
Yeah.
And people who cruise love the product. It's a great product. They like being on it.
So maybe the problem is less about the existing customers, who you said, Clayton, are very loyal, and it's more about the new business. Because every travel brand needs new types of customers to keep them and to keep the product alive, doesn't it? That's perhaps where the problem may well be for that sector.
But even at that, we've been tracking a growth in young travelers wanting to consider cruise as an alternative. Yeah. If you look at, we have a profile in our data sets called resilient travelers. These are people who will travel in the face of government advisory or some kind of crisis. It's 16% of travelers in our data. And a lot of them are young, and a lot of them feel impervious to challenge. And even if you look at what's happening as the economies are opening up around the world, young people are going out onto beaches, into communities. Right or wrong, they are. And I think that's also a hopeful sign for cruise and, and other categories. The other thing I'd say about cruise, and you know this, the fact that there's this built-in sales network called travel agents.
Yeah, exactly.
Big support for the cruise space. The cruise industry still relies on close to 70% of their bookings coming from travel agents. Travel agents consider cruise one of the best products they can sell to make their living. And I think they will push very hard a recovery for the cruise space.
Yeah.
So once you get past these interim months, I think you'll see demand pick up for the cruise industry.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing, we have sister brands, Travel Weekly, US and Travel Age West and stuff like that. They do an awful lot of activity with cruise, and we're already seeing some encouraging signs. I was going to mention that, but I'm glad that you referenced it as well, because as you say, the travel agency community is so important to the cruise, and the cruise is really important to the travel agency community. They work in tandem incredibly well. So just if we
start on August 1, Carnival is going to start cruising on August 1.
Yeah.
Out of some ports. So I think they're ready to go. And I think they must see some demand or they would not be sailing.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so and let's kind of move on a little bit then, Clayton. So, I mean, what's your kind of broader sense on the market's recovery as a whole and the feedback that you're getting from brands? You mentioned earlier about demand coming back and the sentiment reports that you've been doing. I perhaps stupidly said at the beginning that no one should be in the game of making forecasts, but given that you've got the sentiment reports and things like that, what are you sensing in terms of the way these next kind of 8 months are going to play out? Let's go sector by sector, and air recovery and things like that, and airlines and their ability to bounce back.
Here's how our research team's seeing it. This is based on our sentiment monitor, based on the industry we're talking to. So, and let's set Asia aside for a minute, because what's unique about Asia is I would categorize a lot of Asian travel, especially corporate travel, as being similar to domestic travel in the US. And similar to how European travels point to point outside borders, I consider that more domestic patterns. Yep. Whereas in the US, domestic travel is really inside, a certain boundary of states, et cetera. But we definitely believe that leisure, I don't know why people are debating leisure versus corporate. We're 100% sure leisure recovers before corporate does.
Yes.
Leisure recovers in short form, community-based. So it starts in your own community, in restaurants, and even hotels in your own community, and it works out concentrically, in concentric circles to regional destinations, et cetera. In our most recent study, 68% of people told us they feel safest in their car. They want to control their environment. They want to control their experience. We expect places like national and state parks to do very, very well. We expect outdoor destinations to do very well. We expect rural and resort destinations to do well, assuming they're drive market destinations. So outdoor recreation, just being out in a controlled environment where you feel like you have space, is going to be the first part of the recovery. We think the second part of the recovery will be unmanaged corporate travel. These are small businesses or people who have to get out on the road, either associated with the crisis or disassociated with the crisis, but they drive for most of their business travel, or they fly short points and they don't have a corporate travel department holding them back, either to save money or because of liability fears around the virus. Third, we expect mid and long haul leisure to recover. So we do think there will be out volumes in air this year. We're hearing that from a number of airlines we're talking to, that once they relaxed their booking and cancellation policies, they started to see an uptick in bookings. We think the ultra low cost carriers and low cost carriers will recover first. Obviously, the long haul carriers who require a lot of upfront bus revenue for first and business class, that's a different discussion. But airlines that really focus on leisure, say a Spirit, a Ryanair, a Frontier, a Southwest, will begin to pick up volume in the midterm for leisure. Then we expect some group to come back. That would be association first, maybe small Smurf type group business. Then maybe corporate travel. And we see that 2 quarters laggard to the initial recovery. So we could very well see late 2020, early 2021 for a big corporate travel mandated resurgence. And then lastly, corporate group and convention group, followed by international long haul. So that's sort of how we see this coming back. We think leisure demand, this initial leisure demand, will begin midsummer. And we see already some hopeful signs around search and social analytics, around our traveler sentiment survey, that people are ready to go. They're ready to go to leisure destinations this summer. And it will be really interesting to see what fall travel patterns look like, both in Europe and in America, because we think there's some potential for really interesting fall travel patterns via train, via car, where you see some historic levels of travel in the fall for traditional travel segments like partners, couples, matures or older travelers, but even families and traditional summer travelers who might move some of that into fall, given their circumstance, whether the kids are in school or not, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's sort of, Kevin, how we see it broadly.
So, and there is this talk of kind of travel bubbles. So like-minded countries will have agreements where that there can be some initial signs of cross-border travel, maybe, the US and Canada, or on this side of the pond, it would be perhaps some of the Scandinavian countries would relax their border restrictions slightly. So it starts off as domestic travel, or the dreaded word staycation, and then, then it's kind of intra-regional, and then, as you say, it's intercontinental or pancontinental, which is for those airlines that focus solely on that, is a long way away, is probably quite a scary prospect for them.
Right. If you listen to what United, American, Delta, British Airways, even some of the state government airlines of countries like Brazil and several Asian countries, you see the writing on the wall that they're either going to need intervention from their governments.
Yep.
And the airlines are still asking for more stimulus. In America, we expect that could happen. There could be another round of stimulus because those big line carriers who are running long haul routes and who rely on that high dollar corporate traveler are going to see that out a little bit. And they can't survive on leisure traffic like some of the low cost carriers can.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on again then. So, as we've written about extensively, and it's not least because it's a hot topic, is the dominance of and reliance on Google that many travel brands have. The figure that I wrote down here of 2019, just the two brands that spend the most, Booking Holdings and Expedia Group, approximately $12 billion, the vast majority of that on Google. Do you send? Towards the end of his tenure, Mark Okerstrom, and Glenn Fogel, to his credit, has mentioned this quite a lot, as said, as Google has built up its own prowess in the travel industry with its own services, it's something, and I think they've always been very diplomatic, have said it's something that we need to look at. Do you think this correction that has been put upon us, or indeed put upon them, I think Barry Diller, the chairman of Expedia Group, has said that they won't spend more than $1 billion on Google this year. Do you think this is the kind of the course correction that the industry maybe has been desperately waiting for, so that they can do something and then perhaps dictate some of their own terms with how they use Google? Or is it just the easy thing because they've just done it for so goddamn long that that's the thing they're just going to go back to using again?
I don't think this impacts Google negatively in any way.
No.
I believe that things will continue to start and stop with Google. I mean, the people I deal with in the travel industry, the people at Google, Glenn Fogel, who I have a lot of respect for, I mean, these are really smart people. But I think they understand with Google, the landscape's probably not shifting that much. In our own surveys, we know that Google's considered by far the most objective arbiter of travel, even though they're not necessarily completely objective. The consumer traveler sees them that way. They certainly have been very smart about moving more aggressively into Meta, very smart about the way they walk this line between their largest paid search clients, namely Google and Expedia, who at one point I think were 1% of Google's ad revenue.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. I think it's come down. Their spend's come down substantially. But I don't think anything changes for Google's prospects. I think they'll continue to be aggressive, continue to build what I consider a super app of travel.
Yeah.
Where they really do integrate mapping and even trip itinerary around. You can book Ubers through their technology. I mean, they really have created a really nice platform for themselves. Now, I do think this crisis will help the OTAs in the short term. I believe that their position as aggregators will benefit. If you look at what's happened around their spend specifically, their ROIs have come down substantially over the last several years. They were returning $20+ per dollar of search spend at one point. Now it's down to single digits.
Right.
I think the suppliers have gotten smarter. I think they've owned back some real estate against the OTAs in terms of their own inventory and some of the parity agreements. But I think this situation has a chance to revert a lot of that. And I think because OTAs are natural aggregation points, because consumers see them that way, and because they'll continue to have a lot of spending around their platforms, I do think they can bring more consumers into their booking platforms and potentially grow some traction around the bottom of the funnel. So I do believe they're in a good position. I think Airbnb is in a good position in the same way. I think, TripAdvisor remains to be seen how they're going to respond to this. But then there's the discussion about the suppliers. So are the suppliers now in a better position? Because for years, suppliers have been trying to figure out these closed user groups, the hotel community in particular. How do we create one-on-one relationships with our guests to where we can offer things outside of our parity agreements with the OTAs? We can use data to create direct connections, either through loyalty, through Gmail accounts, or Facebook accounts. And we can start to expose inventory and offers that give us some kind of closed user relationship with our best travelers. And I do believe the big brands, especially Marriott, but also Hilton and others, have done a good job creating better relationships with their customers that give them some direct distribution. Whether they can take advantage of that in this situation, given how much blood is on the keyboard around the hotels closing, revenues being reduced, I'm unsure. But I do think it all has to work together to Google's favor.
Yeah.
To come back to your initial question. I think Google wins no matter what, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's it's telling almost then, Clayton, really, that even a crisis of this magnitude can't knock a powerhouse of Google off its very clear mission, really, to kind of become all things to all people in travel. And I'm glad that you said the kind of the super app, because it's something that I've been talking about for quite a long time, and I'm quite glad that it does seem to have that ambition now. I think some of the things that it was doing last year and aggregating everything into one single point was the sign of this is what its intention is. It's just copying what some of those super apps are doing out in the Far East that are seemingly very successful. It's all things to all people in the palm of your hand.
Totally. And you and I have talked about this before, but I still wonder about Amazon coming into the market. I've been saying for 4 years about Amazon would get more aggressive. I've been wrong so far. People remind me of that all the time. But they have started to test, as you know, airfares in India and other places. Yeah. Amazon dipped in and out of travel several times. But my question is, why wouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? Why couldn't they? And in all three cases, I say they should, they would, and they can. They can sell at a lower margin. They have a built-in data platform around Prime that allows them very easy programmatic plays around travel. They can curate packages and do things like they do in their other shopping platforms. Yep. There are just many ways they can get involved. So the point is, if Amazon does decide to get more aggressive, then you wonder how Google responds. Yeah. Because will Google tip even more into booking? Will one of them buy Expedia, for example? Yeah. I think those are all interesting questions that, the whole thing about don't let a crisis go to waste. I mean, will there be opportunities created around an M&A play for an Amazon or a Google and one of the OTAs? I think is a really interesting question.
Now, you kindly wrote a couple of articles for us last year. I think you said it's the here it comes, the travel industry is heading for a recession, and it was a 2-part article. And rather handily in the research for this piece, you gave out all these predictions, which we can now throw back at you to see what you think. But the one that you said was Amazon at the time. And my kind of follow-up question to your comments about Amazon is this: do you sense, given that, and I agree with you, that the industry is ripe for them to come in for so many levels because of Prime, because of pricing, because of everything. Do you sense that they would rather wait and see how the industry shakes out on the back of all this chaos that's happened before they make their move? Or is the time right for them to make their move now, do you think?
Well, Bezos is investing heavily. He said this week that he's going to sacrifice some profit for investing back in the brand and the company infrastructure. So why not use this as a part of the platform? Funny for me to suggest what Bezos should do, but I just think, why wait? They're coming out of this. First of all, travel's going to return, and it's going to return more quickly than people are suggesting. Travel is, when you look at people's discretionary spending and their savings, travel is the number one thing people want to spend on. Yeah, it continues to be the second largest industry in the world. So Amazon, as the largest merchant platform in the world, it just seems like they should be in the travel space. And why wait? As this recovery comes, people would look to a brand like Amazon. I think the question for Amazon is more about the skunk works, the back end of how this would work. How do they create the inventory? How do they switch the inventory? How do they transact the inventory? Yeah. Do they buy an OTA? Do they try to stand something up on their own? That's to me a little bit more interesting too, and might delay them, and maybe it's part of the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there, you say buy an OTA. I mean, to what end? Is it to just have their footprint in the travel industry? Because they've got such a strong brand in their own right. Why would they buy an OTA and not, they wouldn't buy something like an Expedia Group and rebrand it Amazon, because Expedia Group's got so much brand equity of its own. So maybe the argument is that they would build their own service so that they could call it an Amazon travel brand straight away, potentially.
Yeah, I think Expedia gives them a connection to the distribution network. I think
Expedia gives the existing relationships and the wholesale part and the contracting that
gives them inventory like HomeAway, for example, gives them access to different verticals in Meta, et cetera. I think it's something they could choose to brand separately, fold in. They could certainly, they have the money to stand up something on their own, but it seems like an Expedia would be a good way for them to get in quickly, and then they could figure out how they would want to piece that together. Yeah. I also believe that the whole news about Expedia this last few weeks is definitely very positioning them to be sold.
Yeah.
I try to think about who are obvious suitors for that company, and Amazon just seems like it is one of them. But
there are very few suitors, arguably. I mean, who else apart from Amazon would want to buy into an online travel giant?
I agree.
Yeah, indeed. So I suppose last of all then, I mean, your own industry, the ad industry, the marketing industry, we've talked a lot about how the travel industry uses the various components of all this, but is there anything fundamental that you think is going to happen in the ad industry, whether it's the type of platforms that people are going to use going forward, or just the kind of the technology, just to kind of finish us off, Clayton?
Well, so are you asking me about some of the things you've been writing about virtual tours and virtual reality?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not completely bought in by virtual tours, but I can sense why at the point where people are unable to travel, it'd be something that they would be interested in. But I don't sense that there's a long-term future for those kind of things. But what else in the kind of the ad industry itself that you sense is coming?
The things you hear about is the ad world going to engage in new ways around content consumption. So, for example, virtual reality. Are meetings now going to take place virtually on platforms like Zoom? So does an advertising model need to be created around that? I mean, I don't broadly buy that. I think people will return to the patterns they were in before. I think meetings will begin to happen again. I don't think people want to be on virtual calls all day. I don't think that they want to meet in a virtual environment like this. You read increasingly about how people are having headaches and challenges with their health because they're sitting and looking at screens all day. I just don't believe that. I do think from a marketing standpoint, in the short term, brands have to be really careful about the tone in which they approach the market.
Yeah.
And I think long term, you're going to continue to see a move toward data-based, programmatic digital. You're going to see a continued move towards social influence and public relations to drive a broader narrative. And you're going to continue to see content, entertainment, and affinity-based content drive a lot of consumer consumption. So this move around Netflix and a lot of streaming platforms, which has started years ago, is up a lot right now because we're all at home, but that will continue. People will continue to stream content. It's not going to be news content like everybody's doing today. It's going to be entertainment content that's affinity-based. I think events will come back, sponsorships will come back, out of home will come back, all those things. In fact, in our latest study, we're looking at a resurgence already of some of those channels. We're seeing while we've seen paid social and crisis communication remain high, as well as some paid search, we're already seeing a move back into paid advertising because brands are starting to get that consumers are engaged right now on travel. And so a lot of those principles I don't think are going to change broadly over the long term. I think we'll fall back into a lot of those same cadences we were in before the crisis began. And as you know, consumers around the world have short memories.
And indeed, like a lot of parts of the industry have very short memories sometimes as well, right?
Exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I suppose to summarize, it's almost, the world and the industry and the inhabitants of both have gone through something that's so fundamental that they won't have experienced and hopefully won't have to experience again. But there are some things that fundamentally won't change, even as a result of all of this that has happened.
I agree. I think there'll be short-term changes around airports and certainly the way you are in a restaurant or on a plane. I think those things will change in the short term, but over the long term, you can't convince me that airplanes are going to continue to lock down middle seats on their flights and make money. You can't convince me that restaurants are going to seat people at every other table. You can't convince me that we're going to go to entirely touchless service in hotels. It's just not going to happen. And I think once people get past their fear and start to understand that they're in a more a rational state of mind, like we've seen with Zika virus, terrorism, swine flu, SARS, I think people will move back into norms that they had before.
Yeah.
And how long that will take, I don't know, but I think it will happen.
Yeah, that's the question, is the length of time. So, Clayton Reid, thank you very much for joining us on New Reality With. We'll be watching closely to see how things develop over the next couple of months, and your interpretation of those, the sentiment reports that you produce are excellent. So we'll keep in touch, and we'll look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks a lot.
Great talking to you, Kevin. Thanks.